You're watching Byline Wilmington on CBS 10 WILM. Here's your host, Don Ansell.
We're back. We're talking about annexation. There's a court case pending in the recent initiative by the city of Wilmington. The attorney representing the opposition is Jim Eldridge, and he's joining us as our byline guest this morning. The city maintains that it is a viable and legal tool to keep it healthy.
That's a traditional argument that you hear municipalities make.
Does that mean that the case is no longer viable for this annexation initiative, that they're going to be providing services to the annexed area that they don't already have?
Here's what is involved when you challenge an annexation. To understand a challenge, you have to understand what the city has to do. City has to do an annexation report that talks about the services and what it's going to cost and how they're going to pay for it. The city also has to make sure the property qualifies for annexation. There are boundary requirements and urban development requirements.
So there's a whole lot of guidelines that they have to
Mm-hmm.
follow correctly in order to...
And whenever you challenge that type of lawsuit, the claims are always whether they met those requirements. So, for example, in this case, one of the procedural claims we've got has to do with the public hearing that they had on the annexation. We contend that not everybody was given the opportunity to be heard, and the statute clearly says that that needs to be met. So that's one of our claims.
So you're saying you want the courts to invalidate the annexation vote because those guidelines weren't followed? Is that what the case is based on?
The claims that we've put into our petition, we are asking the court to declare the annexation null and void, or in the alternative, to remand it back to City Council to fix the problems that we feel we can prove during the trial.
And the city contends that areas like Monkey Junction use a lot of what the city offers, but don't contribute to what it takes to develop and maintain their fair share of that. Mm-hmm. How do you answer that? What do you say? Is that part of an issue that you deal with as the attorney?
That's certainly that course. I understand that position corresponds with the public policy put forth by the statute, but the city's goal in this annexation is not really a subject matter of the petition. The petition basically talks about, did it follow the right procedure? Was their report informative enough with respect to financial projections so that people coming to the public hearing could have meaningful input?
Do you think that's a fair contention on the city's part?
I'd have to beg off that question. I don't want to be in the position of saying whether the city should or should not annex that area. My position is that in some respects they've done it wrong, and therefore it should be invalidated.
Would you say many of the residents in the Monkey Junction area live there because of Wilmington and what it has to offer?
My experience has been that most people being annexed say they live where they are because they didn't want to live in the city. And I've heard that as well in this particular case.
Do you think this recent, there's a bill that's been considered mm-hmm. in Raleigh to change the annexation laws in North Carolina. Do you think that this recent annexation that you're now fighting was fast-tracked by the city to avoid the new annexation legislation that may come out of the session?
No, I don't have any indication of that. These annexations on the part of the cities do take a year, 2 or 3 years really to put together, so I'm sure the city began that process a couple of years ago. What's interesting is if the reform comes through, and that's a big if the reform comes through, will it be retroactively applied to pending annexations? Because by law, as long as this annexation is tied up in court, the effective date is delayed until the last court has the last say.
And then is it grandfathered in? If the laws are changed, is this grandfathered in, or is the fact that the city voted before that became law, does that take precedent?
I think two answers to that. Number one, most importantly, it depends on what the General Assembly says. They could say we're going to apply this retroactively to any annexation that's not effective, regardless of the vote. And who knows if the General Assembly will do that. But if we are successful in either invalidating it or getting it sent back, then in some respects the procedure starts again, and it could very well be a new annexation procedure that is subsequent to whatever the General Assembly does. So there's two ways you might get there.
Do you think a annexation reform bill is going to come out of this session?
That's hard to say. The House part of it is very interesting and kept alive a referendum aspect. But all you need do is look back to the previous session where the House, I believe it was unanimously, passed a bill putting a moratorium on annexations pending the Legislative Study Commission. Well, it's interesting because once it got to the Senate, that bill never even made it to a committee, so it just died. So we'll have to see what happens in this.
The real
case.
nuts and bolts of what folks opposing opposition want is a vote.
I think basically it comes down to that. I really do.
And do you think municipalities, if some new legislation comes out of this on annexation for the state, that municipalities will be required to give the targeted areas a vote?
It just depends on how that provision, which has stayed alive despite a lot of lobbying and a lot of opposition, has stayed alive thus far. It just depends on how the Senate part of the General Assembly is going to handle that. I believe, it's my anecdotal information, that in most states of the Union that follow an involuntary annexation procedure, there is some sort of a voice on the residents, and yet it has not stymied the ability of those municipalities to expand their borders. So I think there is a balance that you can achieve.
You're really considered the attorney of record for annexation, particularly in this area. Have you handled?
That's nice.
It's good for business.
Yes. Right now I've got 4 suits, one against Greensboro, one against Wilmington, one against Kenston that I just filed last week, and one against the town of Ayden, which is a little south of Greenville. I've handled matters for Eden, Goldsboro, where I got it sent back once and we lost the second go around, and a couple of others that I can't think of.
But no case that's ever been heard has succeeded. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect.
That's incorrect.
And a lot of it depends on non-legal issues. For example, we successfully challenged an annexation in the city of Eden up in Rockingham County, I think it is, northwest part of the state.
You blocked
it. The judge invalidated it, and the city appealed it to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals affirmed that decision. And that was probably 8 years ago. And that city council has never gone back to try to annex that area again. Now here's another example for you. Wilmington, 8 or 9 years ago, I had a constitutional challenge, and we worked real closely with the good neighbors of New Hanover County that had been mobilized for years before. They were so successful in their mobilization, organization, and information dissemination that they changed, and I know you know this, they changed the complexity, the composition of city council, which was 4-3 in favor of to 4-3 against. And here we are now, 9 years later, with the first annexation since then. So,
and an upcoming election.
Right.
And we're going to talk about that when we come back. What kind of impact will this new annexation issue have on the upcoming city election? We'll be right back with annexation attorney Jim Eldridge. Stay with us.